we are very blessed with Pastor Dave. He and Gina are off this weekend having some family time. My name is Brett. I serve as executive pastor here, and I just want to say welcome. Good morning, everybody. It's nice to celebrate the new year together, right? How many of you crazy people stayed up past midnight? Raise your hand, be honest. This is church, okay? God knows, and the rest of us should as well. Hey, you know what? Good for you. Aren't you glad we have an 11:30 service? Right? Isn't that's awesome. Some of you were counting on that when you were staying up at 1 o'clock. Hey, the 8:30 is out. The 10 o'clock, I don't know, maybe, but there's the 11:30. Hey, it's great to see you. If this is your first time here, welcome. We're so glad you're here. New Life is just, it's a fun church to be a part of, right? We've got a God that's doing some amazing things in people's lives. There's stories of what God's doing, and it's just fun to be here. Pastor Dave, who you saw in our video, he will be celebrating 25 years this September as our senior pastor. How cool is that, right? Incredible. Very, very cool. Good friend, amazing boss, and great partner to do ministry with. And my family and I are very blessed by his ministry. So he'll be back with us next week. But yeah, 25 years. Isn't that cool? I love that. Well, if you're a guest of ours first time, let me just say welcome. And also, at the end of our service, we've got a gift for you. We know that sometimes going into the new year can be challenging, and you might need a little extra caffeine. So at the end of our service, go out these doors just off to the left side. We have a gift for you. It's a coffee cup. Okay, not because we don't think you already have coffee cups at your house, but we want to be part of that process in your cabinet with you as well. But inside of that mug, more importantly, there's some information about our church, what God's doing here, some exciting things that are happening, and we want to be able to share that with you. So please go out those doors and get that. Also in your program today is a white card. Take that out. We use that as a great way just to connect back with you on things that you're celebrating or things that we can be praying with you about. So take a minute, fill that out. You can drop it in any one of the baskets at the doors. And then also at the end of the service with our offering, you can put it in there also. So take time, fill that out. Our staff will be back on Monday. We'd love to pray through those things with you and celebrate what God's doing. Okay? All right, how many of you write down in a journal of some kind important things that happen in your life? Anybody do that? Right, something big happens and you hit the pen and the paper and you write that down. Helps you to remember. Well, my wife wrote down a series of first things for us in our dating relationship. Now, we started dating late in life, late for me, early for her. You should never say late in life for your wife. That's just like a major faux pas, fellas, okay? It's just me to you. So she was young, I was old, let's leave it there, okay, and then go on. But we started dating in 2008. And I didn't know this, but Kate had recorded a number of our first somethings together and written them down. And she was cleaning through some boxes, and she found this list. And as we think about 2017, for some of us, there's going to be a series of firsts, right? We're going to move into a new relationship. We're going to ask God to fix something in us, a hurt, a habit, a hang-up, something that we're going to do, and it's going to be a first. So I thought I would share with you some of our firsts as a couple. Okay, now I got permission for this, and so I think I'm good. Am I good, honey? She's looking at me going, careful, careful. Okay, so we were friends for a little while before we started dating, and then in 2008, in the summer of 2008, we started dating. So the first date here is, our first date was May 10th of 2008. Now, we're coming up on celebrating 7 years of marriage together in February. She gets younger, I get older, and she still loves me. It's awesome. It's a great way that works. But May 10th, 2008 was our first date. And I got to tell you, I don't know that I've ever been more nervous in my life, because there's a definite change when you're friends and then it goes to the dating relationship. You know what I'm talking about? There's that little bit of like, hey, we knew each other as friends, but we're stepping into something. And our date started at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturday, the 10th of May. And I think I woke up at like 3 a.m. And you know how you wake up and you're just on? I mean, your brain is on. And so I was like, okay, it's a little early to get ready for the date. So I took off and went to the gym, had a workout, came home, showered, put my clothes on, and at 5 a.m. that morning, I was ready for our date. Like this, it's a little early, okay? I think I changed like 4 times over the course of that, because what you look like on your first date, right? That's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure. And so I changed. And anyway, I ended up driving over and getting to Kate's place at like 3:30 in the afternoon. Now, men, how well does it work with your dating person or your significant when you're early and they're not ready? Does that go well at your house? Because not always, right? So I got there 30 minutes early, and I thought, I can't go, ring the doorbell now. I got to wait for a little while. So I literally sat in my car in her driveway for 15 minutes because I did not want to appear too anxious or early, right? So 15 till, I was like, I can't wait any longer. I've got to go. So I rang the doorbell. Of course, Kate's not ready. She got ready. We had our first date, and I can literally tell you everything that happened on the date, everything that Kate was wearing that day, what we did, where we went. She absolutely kicked my tail in mini golf. I think I lost by like 7 strokes in mini golf. She whooped me, and I was like, that's the girl for me, okay? So, but May 10th was our first date. Now, this is crucial because the next date that she records is May 13th. And at the time, I was a goalkeeper for an indoor soccer team, and I had asked her to come to the soccer game. So guys, we know, right, if the first date goes well and there's a second date, that's really kind of the big deal. So the date went good. May 13th, she comes to my soccer game, and I was like, we're in it for life. Okay, I knew at that point. I didn't really, but May 13th was soccer game. And then May 17th, everybody say aw with me. That was our first kiss, May 17th. Right? Now she's turning red over here. Sorry, babe. But did you catch the order? First date, soccer game, then the first kiss, right? So you got to make sure that we're good. And then she has some other dates on here. She has first flowers, May 24th. So apparently when I came on the first date, I forgot flowers. My bad. Love you. Okay. The funny part is when I look at this list, I remember those mixed emotions, right? When you go on that first date, there's that little bit of fear and anticipation because you're stepping into something new, something different. I remember when Kate and I went over to her mom and stepdad's house for the first time to eat lunch with them, and it was meeting the parents, okay? I was 35, and that still terrified me, okay? But there's something about that. There's emotions attached to all of those first somethings. You remember when you first took the training wheels off your bike and mom and dad let go of the seat? They're like, you got it, and you're going, I'm going to die. You remember that, right? And you're pedaling, trying to stay alive. Remember when you were in the pool and you had the floaties on and mom and dad decided it was time to get the floaties off? And you're like, oh, and you jump in and you actually lived. You remember that? You're okay? All right? But those first times, all of them, there's an emotion, there's a feeling, there's something attached to that. And as we look at 2017, some of us, many of us, have a first in front of us. This is the first year I'm going to be sober, all year. It's the first year I'm going to kick that habit, that addiction. This is that first year. This is that first year when I'm really going to step out and try that business I've been thinking about for years. This is the first year that I'm finally going to get things right with my wife, with my kids, with my in-laws. This is the first year I'm going to actually have the conversations and live the way that God's asking me to live. This is that first year, right? And as we look into that, there's emotions that are tied to that. Some of it is excitement and anticipation. Some of it is joy. Some of it is fear, right? Some of it is uncertainty. And so what I want to do is I want us to look today at a story in the Old Testament that I think will both encourage you and challenge you as you think about those first things that you're going to walk into. So take your copy of God's Word this morning and turn to Joshua chapter 3. Joshua is the 6th book in the Old Testament, and the Scripture's divided into Old Testament, the time before Jesus, and New Testament, Jesus' life and immediately after. So Old Testament, 6th book of Joshua, and chapter 3 is where we're going to be looking today. So whether you've got a paper copy like I do or a smartphone or a tablet, jump on and take a look. YouVersion is a great place to go if you've got a smartphone, okay? As you're looking for Joshua 3, let me set this up so we all jump onto this story at about the same place. In Genesis 12, Genesis is the first book in the Bible. In Genesis 12, God looks down to this man named Abram and says, Abram, I'm going to take you from where you're living. I'm going to move you to a country that I'm going to give you, and I'm going to build you into a great nation. God later changes his name to Abraham, okay? So God says to him, I'm going to make you into a great nation. And so Abraham's family begins to grow late in his life. Ultimately, his descendants move down to the land of Egypt because of a famine that comes through the land that he's living in. Those descendants begin to grow into a nation, and the Egyptians see them and say, that's great free labor. So they enslave Abraham's descendants and make them slaves for 400 years or more in the land of Egypt. And then God chooses somebody named Moses, raises him up, and says, Moses, I'm going to cause you to lead my people out of Egypt to the land that I originally gave to Abraham that they're going to live into. Well, Moses doesn't make some great choices as he starts to try to lead, but later in his life at age 80, God brings him back and lets him lead this nation out of Egypt. Now, if you've never read the book of Exodus, which is the second book in the Bible, incredible stories. As soon as they leave Egypt, after an amazing work of God, they get out of Egypt, they're going through the desert, and they come to the Red Sea. So the Red Sea is a big ocean in front of them, and behind them is the Egyptian army coming rapidly because they're like, hey, that whole free labor force, we let them go? Bad idea. We want them back, right? So they're going after them in the desert. The Red Sea is in front of them. The Egyptian army is coming in on them, and God miraculously delivers them. Now, Moses amazingly looked a lot like Charlton Heston. All right, if you've ever seen the Ten Commandments, you know what I'm talking about, okay? But God opens the Red Sea, and the people walk through and then closes it over the Egyptian army. An amazing work. It's Exodus 14. Read the story. But then over several months, this nation, this group of people, and the scripture tells us, and biblical archaeology will tell us, that there was about 2 million Israelites at that time. If you watch the movie, you see about 2,000 or 3,000 extras in the movie. There was 2 million people. That's 2.5 times the population of San Francisco. Okay? So this group is moving through the desert, and ultimately they come up to the edge of the land that God promised to Abraham hundreds of years ago in Genesis chapter 12. And Moses says, send spies into the land to figure out how we're going to take it over. Spies come back and go, hey man, it's not going to happen. People there are bigger than us, stronger than us, better than us, faster than us, more weapons than us. We're not going to be able to get into this land that God said he's going to give us. No way, not going to happen. Well, what ends up happening is those spies sway the nation of Israel, and the nation never goes into the promised land that God was going to give them. And God says, as a punishment for not choosing to trust me and go in, all of the adults that are alive at the moment of that decision will die in the desert and never go in. So the nation of Israel for 40 years wanders around in this desert until every one of those adults is dead. Now here's what I want you to hear before we jump into this story. As you look ahead to those first steps in 2017, sometimes your fear and my fear stops us from experiencing God's blessing and leading in our life. That's what happened here. God had said to Abraham, I'm going to give you this land. God had said to Moses, I'm going to lead you into this land. God had miraculously parted the Red Sea, led the people through, protected them in the desert, provided for them the entire way. They get to the edge of the land, and then fear stops them from experiencing God's blessing. I've had that happen in my own life. I've had that happen where I've sensed God leading me into something. Because I was afraid to walk into it, I missed out on something that God wanted to do either in or through or with me. And I don't want that for us as a church, right? There's too many amazing things that God wants to do in your life this year to allow fear to get you off track. So where we're going to pick up in the story, what's happened now is that all those people have died in the desert. Moses, who was the leader that God had put in charge to take him out of Egypt, he also dies in the desert, never getting into the promised land. God takes Moses number 2, a guy named Joshua, which the book is named after, raises him up as the next leader. And in Joshua 1:9, God speaks this powerful statement in Joshua and says, have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous, do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, because the Lord your God is with you wherever you will go. And then he says, Joshua, I'm going to use you to take my people into this land I promised Abraham hundreds of years ago. So where we're going to pick up in the story, the nation of Israel, all 2 million of them now, are lined up on the bank of the Jordan River, looking over into this land that God had promised that their parents and grandparents were too afraid to walk into. They're looking at it across this river. Now the river is called the Jordan River. And the word Jordan means the descender. So literally between the Sea of Galilee, which is in the north of Israel, and the Dead Sea, which is in the south, it drops 1,000 vertical feet. So this is a moving river, okay? Anybody been whitewater rafting? Anybody ever gone? Okay, good. You and me are crazy enough to try it, okay? Whitewater rafting is awesome because the water is dropping and it's moving rapidly. That's kind of like the Jordan is in many places. Most of the time, it's 50 or 60 yards wide, and it's not all that deep. At the time that this story happens, it's flood season. So this river is now up to 1 mile wide and 150 feet deep, and it is moving. It's carrying trees and cattle and Apple cell phones and iPads and all down the river, okay? They even had them back then. But it's moving. So here's what I want you to do. As we get into this story, I want you to imagine that you're one of those Israelites looking at this river. And between you and what God has promised to bless you with is this barrier or this river. And what you have to understand is that this nation of Israel was comfortable. They'd gotten used to living in the desert. Many of them were born in the desert. Many of them grew up in the desert. They hadn't known slavery. So when they're hearing stories about this land that God promised, they're hearing their parents say, yeah, and there's big people, and they're mean with bad weapons, and they're going to kill you when you walk in there. That's what they've been hearing, and that's what's happening. That's the setup that they have to move into God's blessing. And between them and God's blessing is this barrier called a river. The hard part sometimes of stepping into what God has best for us is we're just comfortable enough where we are, right? After a while, you get used to sand in your socks, sand in your sleeping bag, sand in your tent, sand in your food, sand in your underwear, right? You kind of get used to it. It may not be perfect, but it's comfortable. And sometimes comfortable will stop us from taking that first step into God's best. So this nation of Israel is lined up right there. Joshua, as the leader, is getting ready to speak to them as to how they're going to get across. So flip open to Joshua chapter 3, and we'll start in verse 11, okay? Joshua says to the nation of Israel, look, the ark of the covenant, which belongs to the Lord of the whole earth, will lead you across the Jordan River. Now, if you've ever seen the Indiana Jones movies, you know what the Ark of the Covenant is, okay? It's a large chest which had carrying poles on it, and inside this ark was the 10 Commandments that God had written in stone for the people, Aaron's staff that God had miraculously made to bud, and they put that inside of there, and then they also put in a sample of the manna. Manna is the food that God provided the nation of Israel in the desert. And if you're ever in a Bible trivia game, the word manna means, what is it? Isn't that awesome? God sends this food from heaven, and everybody wakes up and goes outside and goes, what is that? That's what manna actually means, is what is it? So that's all in the ark. But the ark was a representation of God's presence, God's power, and God's leadership. It was the most sacred religious object of the Jewish culture. That's what the ark was. So God says to Joshua, hey, the ark is going to go first down to this river that's flooding, okay? Let's keep reading, verse 12. Now choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. The priest, verse 13, will carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth. As soon as their feet touch the water, the flow of water will be cut off upstream, and the river will stand up like a wall. Don't you wish you were there? Isn't that awesome, right? You know what's missing, though, in this account? Is where Joshua goes, sweet, I get the whole wall thing, but where and when and what's the details and how's everybody going to get across and how are we going to move 2 million people with carts and horses and goats and kids and babies and how are we going to do all that again, right? You don't read any of that there. See, what can happen sometimes when you and I feel like God's inviting us to step into something new is that our own natural tendency to want to know all the details in advance gets in the way of God's work and God's purpose, right? Hey, God, I'll totally step out in faith. Just give me all the details of how this is going to work out first, and then I'm all in, okay? If you give me all the play-by-play and tell me who's going to win the college national championship football game, sorry, I let that slip. If you can tell me who that is up front, I'm all in on this faith thing, right? No, that's not what Joshua does at all, right? Joshua says, hey, God's calling us into this land. He's going to do something. You guys need to go. Now, what allows somebody to take that kind of step of faith? It's learning to listen and respond to God's leadership, right? So the first thing, and I don't want you to write this down, but I want you to hear this. This first thing about taking steps of faith in 2017 is about listening and responding in faith to what God might be asking you to do. That's what Joshua does. About a month ago, Kate brought home for us a little plant in a pot and put it on our countertop. And I came home from work and I said, hey, what is that little thing? And she said, oh, it's an amaryllis. I said, well, sorry, what's an amaryllis? And she said, oh, it's a flower, and it flowers around Christmas time. Now, everything else is dying and dead, right? But it flowers at Christmas time. But at the point that I saw it, it was a little pot with a little bulb and a little green shoot kind of sticking up. So I'm thinking, that's not all that impressive, okay? She said, no, really, it's going to be really cool. Well, the stem on that thing is about 36 inches high, and it's got 4 beautiful, huge red flowers on it now. And so we found a spot in our home that had the sunshine pouring in, and we put that little pot right there. And you know when the corn grows around here, you can almost hear it? You know what I'm talking about? Like you watch it one day and you drive by and it's 6 inches. You come back the next morning, it's like 4.5 feet. You know what I'm talking about? Okay. So this thing literally was growing like 6 inches a day. But what was happening is it was sensing where the sunlight was, and the stem was leaning into the sunlight. So every day we kind of had to rotate that little thing around to make sure that it just didn't grow at an angle like that. And here's what I want you to catch. What Joshua did is he sensed God's leadership and leaned into it in the same way. And that's what you and I have to do, right? I've never had God give me all the details to everything up front. But I have sensed God's leadership and direction, and then I'm learning to lean into that. That's what Joshua does. It allows him to line the people up at the river with no solution in front of him and go, hey, gang, get ready to go. We're going to get to the other side of that river. Because he'd learned to listen and he'd learned to move in response. And here's the first thing I want you to write down. Okay, if you're taking notes and you've got a note sheet in there, write this down there. God always goes first. God always goes first. Okay? Look at verse 11. Look, the Ark of the Covenant, which belongs to the Lord of the whole earth, will lead you across the Jordan River. What I love about this is that God knew the heart of his people. He knew there was fear there, right? He could have said, hey, you guys just start walking, and when you get there, everything will work out. But he didn't. He said, I'll go first. And for the nation of Israel, that ark, that sacred spiritual box that represented God, his power, his presence with his people, that went half a mile in front of everybody else so that everybody could see what could happen, and God went first. Now here's what I want you to hear, church. When you're listening to and responding to the prompting of God in your life, and you're about to face that challenge, that river, whatever it is, you got to know that God's gone first. God's gone in front of you. If you want to have a conversation with somebody that's a tough conversation, maybe it's with a spouse, maybe it's with a child, maybe it's with a mom or a dad or a close relative, brother or sister, and you got to have that tough conversation. You feel like God's prompting you to have that conversation. You go, I got to take that first step. I got to open up this conversation. And you're beginning to walk into it and fear starts to hit you. No, God's gone ahead of you to prepare that if God's inviting you into it. God always goes first. When you feel that prompting and tugging on your life to step in and make a change in your life, to break a habit, to break a stronghold, to break an addiction in your life, and you're going, I don't know, there's a lot of fear in front of me, know that God's gone first, right? God's purpose for you is to live in health and connection and relationship with people. That's God's design for you. So know God's gone first. Now, what's interesting about this story is that the ark didn't normally go first. The ark actually lived in the center of the nation of Israel. And most of the time, that's where it stayed. Wherever the people moved, the ark moved in the center. Because that was the center of all their life. All of their life as a Jewish nation revolved around God, his work, his purpose, and his plan. So God lived in the center. Every once in a while, the ark would move out to the front. And it begs the question, why? Why did God put the ark out in front? But I want to illustrate for you the reason that I think God did that in this case, okay? Back a couple years ago, my son Thomas and I and my wife Kate, we were in Arizona. We've got some family in Phoenix. And we were out visiting, playing around. We went out to this place called Hole in the Rock, just outside of Phoenix. It's literally like this mini mountain that comes up out of the desert. It's, I don't know, 1,000 vertical feet, something like that. It's not super high. But at the top of this thing, it's just this red rock in the middle of the desert, is a natural cut hole in the side of the mountain. And Native Americans that lived there used to mark the seasons by looking at the sunrise through that hole in the mountain. It's called Hole in the Rock. And there's really only one way to get to the top of this thing. And so you kind of wind around the outside and ultimately make it up to the top. So we're sitting up there, we're looking through the hole, we're taking family pictures, doing all the good touristy stuff. And my son Thomas looks over the edge and he goes, "Hey, Dad, you think we can climb up right there?" Now, what you got to understand is where you're sitting, there's a slant that begins to happen, then all of a sudden it just literally drops off in front of you. He goes, "Hey, do you think we can make it up that way?" I was like, "Yeah, let's go." Well, we ended up coming back and looking at the front part of this thing. And I got to be honest with you, when you're sitting on top of this and you're looking down, it looks a lot easier than it does when you're on the bottom looking up going, whoa, okay? But I said, "No, I think we can make it, man." So we got down to the bottom and I said, "Okay, you go ahead and I'll help you up." "I'm right behind you, buddy." "Nope." No, seriously, Thomas, I'm right here. You go ahead and start and I'll make sure that you don't." "Nope." "Okay." I said, what if I go first and then you follow me up where I'm going?" "Okay, Dad." See, when Dad goes first, we all of a sudden developed a sense of courage that we never had before, right? I think what God knows about us is when we know God's gone in ahead of us and prepared the heart for that conversation, prepared the land for that, whatever it is, prepared the person for that. When we know God's gone first, it gives us the courage to step into whatever is there. So what I want you to hear, and the reason that I think God sent the ark first in such a way, is God wanted his people to know, I'm going ahead of you. You can walk into this thing with courage because I'm already there and I'm already in control of what's going to happen. Now let's keep going in the story. Look at verse 14. So the people left their camp to cross the Jordan, and the priests who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. It's the harvest season, and the Jordan was overflowing its banks. But as soon as the feet of the priests who were carrying the ark touched the water at the river's edge, the water above that point began backing up a great distance away to a town called Adam, which is near Zarethan. And the water below that point flowed onto the Dead Sea until the river was dry. Then all the people crossed over near the town of Jericho. So what happened here is God stopped the water when the priests stepped into it and backed it up to this town called Adam, which is about 15 miles away from where biblical archaeologists think the nation of Israel crossed. Now, why 15 miles? Well, if you've got 2 million people, you got to get across the river, you kind of need a big path, right? But God backs it up 15 miles away. Now, if you're writing notes, here's what I want you to write down next, okay? God's work and my obedience are connected. God's work and my obedience are connected. See, I wish this passage actually read differently, because then it would be easier for me. It'd be a lot easier if God said, "Hey, I sent the ark out in front of everybody, and in just a minute, the water's going to stop flowing, and I'm going to dry the whole thing out, and you're going to watch as the ark goes through on dry ground first." Right? Wouldn't that be easier? Or if it even said, "Hey, as the priests with the ark are getting close to the river, the water's going to stop." But that's not what it said, right? It said the guys carrying the ark, they not only have to get close to the edge of the river, they got to take the first step into the river. And when their foot touches the water, that's when the water stopped flowing. Sometimes you got to get your feet wet to walk on dry ground, right? Sometimes you and I have to take that first step into that conversation, into that moment, into that conflict, into that rehab, into that breaking of the pattern of addiction. You and I have to take that first step. Why? Because God knows that His work and our obedience are connected, not because He can't. God can do whatever He wants at any point in time that He wants without us, period, but He doesn't seem to work that way. He seems to work in partnership with us, choosing to work in and through us. Why? Because as James 1 says, the testing of our faith produces perseverance. And perseverance, when it has its work, brings us to a place of maturity. So you and I have to be ready to take that first step and get our feet wet so that ultimately we can walk through on dry ground. I wish it was different. I wish the guys had stood back from the river and God had said, hey, watch this. Done. Right? But He didn't. Instead, He said, hey, put your feet in the water, and when you put your feet in the water, I'll stop it from running. Now, I've seen that in my life time and time again. I've seen God say, hey, I want you to do this, and I'm sitting there going, okay, clear the path for me. And He goes, no, just do it. And I'm going, no, clear the path for me. He goes, no, trust me, take that first step and just do that. Okay? This church is here because 34 years ago, or 40 years ago, a group of 34 people said, we believe that God wants us to start a church in Turlock that's going to radically shape this culture. So Easter Sunday, 40 years ago, that group of 34 people met and started New Life Christian Center. Every weekend now, on a given weekend that's not a holiday, we have 21 or 2,200 people that make up the New Life family over 4 services. We've got 5 separate venues on our campus. This, our hallway, our family room, our cafe, and our outdoor patio when the weather's nice. Sometimes we're putting 3 and 4 rows of chairs in places trying to fit people. Why? Because a group of 34 people said, hey, I'm going to put my foot in the river. Okay? I'm going to do what doesn't make a lot of sense, and I'm going to take a step of faith and watch God work in a miraculous way. And we still see that at New Life today. How many of you knew we were supposed to pour the pad on December 2nd? You remember that? Right? December 2nd, we were scheduled to pour that pad out there for our new building. December 2nd came and went because it rained. And guess what? You can't pour wet cement and let it get rained on. It doesn't work. So we rescheduled. We said, God, we believe you want us to pour this pad. We believe you want us to build this building. So December 9th, we're going to pour. Guess what happened on December 9th? Don't you love it? I love that we're getting rain. We just need to pour cement. So last week, the week before Christmas, we're supposed to pour again, and we were supposed to pour on the Thursday night into the Friday morning right before Christmas. Pastor Dave and I are watching the weather report early in the week, and it's not looking good. Guess what's supposed to happen on Thursday night into Friday morning? Rain. So we were praying together, and both of us felt like God said, you need to pour early. Okay. So I called the contractor. He's not a believer. I called the contractor, and I said, hey, we need to pour 24 hours earlier. Not possible, buddy. We've got 2 pumps. We've got cement we got to order. We got guys we got lined up. We're just going to have to make it work. No, I don't think it's going to work, man. It's supposed to rain on that Thursday night into Friday morning. We need you to pour 24 hours earlier. Okay, I'll call around, but all the other crews are already booked up, and everybody else is trying to beat the rain too, so we're just going to have to put it off again. And I said, honestly, I think God's going to do something here. I don't know how, I don't know why, but I think God's going to make it happen. Will you make some phone calls? Sure. 2 hours later, he calls me back. He says, yep, I called all up and down the Central Valley, all up and down the coast. There's not a crew that I can find that can do your size pour, period. We're going to have to wait until Thursday night or Friday morning. And I said, nope, that's not going to work. What? I said, hey, I believe, Pastor Dave believes that God really wants us to get this thing poured. I don't know why, but I need you to keep looking, and I believe God's going to make this thing happen. So an hour later, he calls me back, and he says, hey, there's this crew out of L.A. They're going to be in Modesto on Wednesday night into Thursday morning. They're going to come to our pour right after they're done on Wednesday night, and we're going to be able to pour through into Thursday morning. God's work and my obedience are connected. You know what happened right after we poured? Guess what happened on Friday? Rain. That was awesome, though, because that's what we needed. Our next scheduled pour date was January 2nd. You know what's going to happen on January 2nd? God knew, right? All the way through your life, church, there's going to be those moments when you feel like God's saying, hey, you got to do this. It may not make sense in the moment, but if you're willing to step in and get your feet wet so you can walk on dry ground, you'll see God do incredible things in your life. Absolutely incredible things in your life. Now, there's one more thing that I want to share with you, okay? So look down at verse 17. It says, meanwhile, the priests who are carrying the Ark of the Covenant stood on dry ground in the middle of the riverbed as the people passed by. They waited there until the whole nation of Israel had crossed the Jordan on dry ground. Here's the real last thing I want you to write down, okay? To embrace God's best, I have to let go. To embrace God's best, I have to let go. See, what happened is, early in this message, I asked you guys to think about this passage like an Israelite. You've been in the desert for 40 plus years, or 40 years. You've grown up in the desert. You know the desert. The desert is comfortable. You got sand everywhere, but you're used to it at this point. In front of you is the river, and you got to cross it. It's amazing to me that in 2 million people, not a single person stayed on the other side of the river. I wish we could hang on to what we know and step into what God has in front of us and keep hanging on to both. It doesn't work, right? You can't hang on to the familiar and step into what God has next for you many times. You've got to let go. And sometimes what we have to let go of in order to step into God's best is the tough stuff. Some of us have to let go of bitterness that we've been carrying around for years. Somebody hurt us, somebody offended us, somebody did something to us or one of our family members, and we got hurt and we didn't deal with it, and it's become bitterness. And in order to embrace God's best for us, we have to let go of bitterness so we can live in a place of peace and reconciliation. Some of us have to let go of fear, right? To embrace what God has next for you, that first step in 2017, you've got to be willing to let go of fear, because fear is that thing that's been holding you back from stepping into fulfilling God's purpose and plan for your life because you've been afraid to let go. Some of you have to get past anger. Some of you have to get past resentment or frustration. Some of you have to get past addiction. Some of you have to get past fear of conversations that you have lined up that you know you have to have. But you have to let go, because God's plan for you is to love Him, love people, and live into His plan and purpose for your life. And you cannot hang on to those things that you become comfortable with in order to step into what God has next for you. It would make life a lot easier if we could, but we can't, right? When Kate and I had that first date, what will give a little perspective to that first date is, for both of us, this is a second marriage. So we brought into our marriage histories, hurts, hang-ups. We called it playing with ghosts in the closet. So we knew God was inviting us to kind of hang out a little bit more with each other. We felt that. Both of us felt that. But we have to be willing to put aside all that baggage to go out on that first date and start something different. And thank God that we did. Because 7 years in February, right? But here's what I want you to hear, church. We did because we knew God was going to do a work in us. We did because we were willing to walk through it. We did because we trusted God enough. We weren't perfect. We messed up along the way. I know I did more than anything. But the reality was, God led us into something and gave us the courage to step into what He had for us in the future. My prayer for you and your family, my prayer for our church, is that in 2017, we hang on to the fact that God goes first. We hang on to the fact that there's a connection between God's work and our obedience. We hang on to the fact that in order to move forward, we've got to let go of some things in our past. And we get to watch 2017 be one of those incredible years in our lives, in this community, in the life of this church, because we were willing to live as people of faith. Right? Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to bow your heads for a minute, and I'm just going to ask you to listen and interact with God. Maybe while I was talking, there was something that God was laying on your heart as a first step. Maybe it's a commitment to break an addiction and seek help. Maybe it's a commitment to have a conversation that you've been putting off. Maybe it's a commitment to try something new and step into a relationship, step into a job opportunity, step into something. And as I've been talking, God's been kind of laying that on your heart. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Ask God to give you the courage and the faith to trust Him and take that step and then see what He'll do in your life. Just spend a minute talking with God on that. Father, as your people here at New Life, as your sons and your daughters, we desperately want to see you work in our lives. We want to get unstuck from those places that we've been wrestling with in 16 and 15 and 14. And we want to find that true freedom and joy that's found only in relationship with you. So as we step into some of these things, as we take these first steps in 2017, God, give us the courage to trust you, give us the faith to trust you, and then let us walk into these things knowing that you're there. God, make this a year where we look back and we just say, God did amazing things in our lives in this 2017, simply because we chose to be obedient and listen. We pray this in your name. Amen.